Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Jaclyn. I am really looking forward to this conversation, Jaclyn. The chat we had, 2 months ago now, and the little preamble we've had now, just before we started recording. I know that we're in for a real treat, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from this, because today, we're going to be talking a lot about transracial adoption, and as an adoptee, a white guy adopted by white parents. My curiosity of this knows no bounds, because I know how little I know about it, and how little lived experience I have on it. So welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Simon. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. So could you introduce yourself to the listeners, please, Jaclyn?
Absolutely. My name is Jaclyn Skalnik. By trade and training, I am a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist. My practice is adoption wellness, and we see only adopted people and their families. And in this practice, we have an effort to provide psychoeducation, community education, and adoption support when it comes to the adopted person and all the people that are connected to them. From a personal perspective, I was raised in the United States in the Midwest after being adopted from South Korea, and I am considered an international and transracial adopted person, meaning my adoptive parents are a different race than myself and my adopted siblings. So we do identify ourselves as transracial adoptive family.
Thank you. Wow. So we're going to get lived experience, and today lived experience, and we're also going to get obviously the of you growing up and of you professionally. So this is for me the ultimate juice part, because people that have their own experience, and people that have the professional experience and the extra perspective, the distance that gives, and the variety of the people that they've seen and continue to see in their professional practice. And for me, this is that gives a clarity and a precision, and a variety that is at the heart of what we're trying to do with Thriving Adoptees. And what you were saying just before we hit record was the fact that every adoptee's experience is different, and you're in a perfect position to see that, because you work with so many adoptees. So we were talking about seeing, what we were talking about healing, and we were talking about different healing experiences, and we were talking about expectations, and realizing that the different levels of difficulty people go through. And you were saying that, what was the metaphor that you used in terms of the clouds and the...
Yeah. I think when it comes to healing or setting goals or anything that we want to achieve for ourselves in terms of growth, one of the key pieces to being successful, in my opinion, is setting realistic expectations. And I think the metaphor that I shared, Simon, was if we set a goal to reach the moon and we don't ever even leave the Earth's atmosphere, then we might be disappointed. However, if we set a goal to soar in the clouds or beyond the clouds, and we soar well above the clouds, then by means of success, we feel more empowered and confident, and then perhaps we can extend our goals. But so much about healing, I feel like should be within our reach. And that's the part that is very different for every adopted person, to try and determine how far is our reach and will that be good enough.
Yeah. When you said that, the thing that came to my mind was a conversation I had with Rebecca. You know, so have you heard of Rebecca? Rebecca Sansom. She's done the film with Nancy Vario about reckoning with the
Yes.
primal wound. Yeah.
Yes, the primal wound. Yep.
Yeah, and I so that you can listeners can check that out in the back catalogue on Thriving Adoptees. So I asked her about thriving adoptees, and she said, "Well, I don't think I am." She said something like, "I don't know whether I could consider myself," and I thought that's really interesting, because it kind of plays into that expectation thing. So for me, if we looked at this, you might say, my expectations for healing are when I don't have any negative feelings at all. That might be somebody's expectations on healing, and that's not how I would see it. That's not how I would see it at all.
Right.
You know, the idea that we could ever go through our days without feeling down at some point, to me, if we set that as our goal, then we're always, you know, I won't. So what I'm saying is, I won't consider myself to have healed until I get to the point where I have no negative feelings at all. Then for me, that would be a completely false expectation.
Right. Right.
So what do you mean about expectations
Well, I
in
think
relation to healing?
sure, of course, when we use this term healing, I think it's important for me to put this out there along with this discussion.
Yeah.
So I think when we hear the term healing, most of us, from a general perspective, think of a physiological wound and the process by which that wound heals, right? So if it gets oxygen and it's cleaned out, it will scab over, the skin might regenerate, etc. We might still have a scar visible and we might not. I think that's the idea that a lot of us as humans, on this very base level, think about when it comes to healing. But what we're talking about, Simon, I think is the emotional healing. And that's where I'm thinking about expectations. Now, there's a couple of different schools of thought. And as I mentioned, I don't believe that adoptees are a monolith. We all have individual experiences, perspectives, feelings. All of them are valid, and I simply cannot represent all adoptees by any means. So what I share with you is from my personal experiences and then my experiences as a professional in the adoption therapy world. So when we think about healing, I think it's important for us to think about grief. The two cannot be separated when we're talking about an emotional wound versus a physical wound. So, for the emotional wound, we have to think about how we identify grief. So, the example that I'll share, Simon, is for me, I don't have this specific idea that I need to be healed or that I need to go through a healing process. To me, that insinuates that I can get to the end of my day or the end of my life and not have any grief associated with whatever context I'm speaking about in terms of healing. So, as an adopted person, if my goal is to heal, I need to understand what are my expectations. Or if I'm working with a patient and they say, I want to heal from so much of this heavy grief, my job is not to tell them or define what healing is. My job is to walk beside them in that emotional grief and help them outline what are the steps of grief, what are the passages that we go through. And the example that I will give from an emotional grief is one that many humans can relate to. We don't have to be adopted. If any of us have ever lost a loved one in our life, and there is a period of grief that we go through very immediately, and then as time goes on. When we lose that loved person, Simon, some of us may say that we've lost a part of us, or a part of our heart, or a part of us that can never fully be regenerated because friends and family can't be replaced. If we lose a limb, we might be able to get a prosthetic, but we will never be 100% whole. We have substitutions, we have accommodations. And so when we lose that loved person in our lifetime, and I don't know that we can ever fully heal from the grief of what it is like to live without them. What we can do is we can learn how to cope. We can learn how to live and sit in our feelings of grief to the extent that maybe one day we can talk about that person without crying, or maybe we can think about that person, or maybe we even start to identify different relationships and how they might come close to that. But I don't know that from a 100% perspective of healing, can we actually fully get there? Because you don't just get over somebody who you've lost. So I like to think you don't have to get over it, we have to get through it. So moving through that grief can help us feel healthier as we process whatever you call it, the wound, the need to heal, the emotional deficiency, all the different terms that we talk about as adopted people. And for many of us who are adopted, there's this fantasy that if we have a chance to meet and reunite our biological families, somehow that will provide us with some element of healing. But the difference is meeting someone you're biologically related to as an adult who also happens to be a stranger that you might not share language with or culture with or values with does not replace an entire childhood lost of being able to be raised with that biological family. So that's how I like to think of the differences between healing, between growing, between identifying what stage of grief we're at so that we can come to living a healthy life one day at a time.
Okay. So I'm a simple guy, right? Without the clinical training that you've had. Okay. So are you saying that are you saying that the grief of a lost birth parent is very similar to the loss of a loved one? Is that what you're saying?
From an emotional perspective,
Oh,
yes,
okay. Okay.
because we have learned to live our lives as adopted people without that biological connection. You know, Nancy Vera talks about that primal wound. So
Yeah.
while all of our experiences as adoptees are different, most of our lives or trajectory into adoption, we have that commonality, is
Right.
that we were separated from the person who gave us life. And so if we look at it from that emotional perspective, I do like to equate, not that it's exactly the same.
No, no.
I like to equate that of losing a loved one. Now, the biggest difference, of course, is when we lose a loved one, we lose a lifetime of memory that we have with them. So we have something to tangibly hold on to. Versus when we think about our biological family or a biological mother, we don't have tangible memory that we can recall because most of us were relinquished or abandoned at a very, very young age where we didn't have verbal memory to store some of those things in our mind. But we instead grew up with this fantastical imagery of what she looks like or what life would have been like or where did I get this trait from, where do I get my hair from, and that mystery that fills in for that lifetime of memories, that is the biggest difference between losing a loved one to death or to be lost versus being separated from a biological family.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so the we've talked about before we started recording about the extra level of complexity that transracial and international adoption can add to this, and is and this isn't a theory. This is just a theory or an idea that's popped into my head, right? So I'm just running it by you. So bearing in mind what you just said. So you talked about the mystery. So is the complexity of transracial adoption, is that due to the fact that the mystery is deeper? The mystery is more curious, it's more mysterious because it's
I
so
do think
far
that's part of
away.
it. Yeah, I do think that's part of it. Um, there's also another layer of identity that ties into without having exposure or experience with the race that we identify or people expect us to identify with. That is something that many transracial adopted people have to learn to navigate on their own once they become an adult and go into the world on their own. That includes code switching and cultural chameleonizing ourselves and trying to figure out how Asian am I versus how white American do I feel. And so, yes, the mystery part of that is a huge piece of that lost identity, which also contributes to grief. Because when we're not sure who we are or where we come from, it's hard for us to know where we're going.
So it's an extra level of confusion.
I like to use the term complexity,
Oh,
but
sorry.
yeah, but for
I'm a
many of
simple guy.
us, yeah, that's okay. For many of us, it very much is confusion. Very, very, very uh, confusing, particularly for little adoptees who are learning to see the world through their lenses or their adoptive parents' lenses. And, there's this concept that I talk about that doesn't relate to every transracial adoptee, but many of us who were raised by white parents and we identify as people of color. We went through our childhood under this invisible umbrella, if you will, of privilege. And for me, in my experience, I was able to go to different stores without being followed. I was able to take vacations without people coming up to me. So there are these privileges that that I had that I may not have been able to have if I weren't adopted or if I stayed within my own race or etc. And I use the term privilege lightly because I don't think it's a positive thing. I think if anything, it has hindered adoptees of color, their ability to navigate the world beyond their adoptive home. And so if we have safety and if we have love within our adoptive family, those are all wonderful things that every human needs. But transracial adoptees beyond those basic needs need to have not just exposure, but experience with their birth ethnicities and their birth races.
Yeah. So I'm the thing that pops into my head then is that there's a kind of like, is there a shock factor here and confusion or complexity? So you are you as in transracial adoptees, and I'm generalizing here. I'm not causing any offense to anybody. You're talking about this invisible umbrella of privilege. So the first thing is that it's invisible. As you're growing up, you can't see it, and then something, and then you're grown up and you're out in the world as an adult. There is no umbrella anymore because you're not with the white parents that you were before, with before in the store, and people start treating you differently, and you can't understand why that happens when that first time that happens, and then there's a shock, like, and none of us like shocks or changes, and then you become aware of you become the umbrella that was invisible as you were growing up then becomes visible to you, and you can see what's happened. But until you see what's happening, it's just, the situation is just getting more and more complex. The questions are growing and growing, and you've got more and more on your mind, and you're disappearing down the dark, uncertain tunnel, and you can't get out.
That doesn't sound very pleasant, does it?
It doesn't sound, yeah. So how do we get through this? How do we see through this? How do we, what's the way out? What's the way out of the tunnel? Other than listening to fantastic podcasts with superb guests like you.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, I am the kind of person who likes to talk with and identify problems or challenges or issues so that we can identify how we can move from that to more hope, to, as you call, more healing. And that's not limited to adoption, right? That's the world that we live in. But as we speak about adoption, there's a couple of things that I can see that I feel like should be pretty manageable. So I have a list of things that, I share with adoptive parents who are raising transracial kids. Here are the things you can still do. But then I have this whole population of adult adoptees over here, Simon, who their relationships with their adoptive parents have been broken, and because there's resentment and they're out in the world now without this umbrella and they don't have the tools to navigate life as a person of color, and particularly here in the States when racial challenges are at its all-time high from our lifetime. It's really creating a barrier between adult adoptees of color and their white parents. And so for that population, there are things that I would love to also encourage them to then take on for themselves that maybe they weren't taught, but now they can take the initiative to learn. But what I've found though, Simon, is I can't and the world can't expect these adult adoptees of color to just pick up their bootstraps and learn the things. Like any other process, they should need to be allowed a space to grieve what they didn't get growing up. Once they can feel held and heard and seen, then and only then might they be able to then start their process of growing. And that might mean finding other transracial adoptees like them. That peer social support, I always say, it can be so therapeutic. Um, they can reach out and find adoption competent therapist. They can start to explore race on their own as an adult. But these things take time. They take a lot of time.
Yeah. So I guess what we're talking about here is and it's tricky because we're just having a conversation, and you're a therapist, so we're talking about your work, whereas therapy is an experience, and it takes time. So there's only so much that we can. There's only so much. We can't go into a therapy session. A podcast isn't a therapy session, so it's kind of tricky to say, oh, okay, well, the answer is therapy. Well, I'm listening to the podcast. What have you got for me, guys? So what have we got for them? What have we got for that? I mean, the expectations thing is key. Patience on that journey, I guess, is key. Hope, the light at the end of the tunnel, is key. And if people didn't think there was any light at the end of the tunnel, they wouldn't be listening to the podcast, would they?
Right.
They would.
I like the image of the well, Simon. So if I, as a transracial adopted person, I don't have access to resources. I don't have therapy. I don't know other people who are adopted. And I'm sitting at the bottom of this well looking up. Maybe there's an adoptive parent who's throwing down some food at me. Maybe there's somebody over here that's throwing me a rope but doesn't quite reach. This is what I want to say to the transracial adoptees that are listening to your podcast right now, that are at the bottom of that well. I have been there. And what we actually need is someone to come into the well all the way to the bottom and sit with us and hold us as we grieve and not judge us as we become angry. And then and only then, in our own time, will we be able to start to make our way out of the well with that person who's with us. And transracial adapted people all over the world need to hear that they are not alone. You are not alone. There's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. We could be surrounded by other people. We could be surrounded by people who love us, but we could still feel lonely because maybe there isn't someone that can relate to us. When I was younger, raised with white parents, I lived with this quote privilege because I was adjacent to whiteness. I used to walk past a mirror or a piece of, glass in a shopping center, and I would see my face or my reflection, and I would startle myself because I didn't recognize who I saw in the mirror. Literally, because I imagined myself looking like my white peers. So then when I would see my image for a second, it would remind me that I wasn't, and I didn't know what to do with that. There are adults, Simon, who are still experiencing this. That what I want you to know is that you are not alone. And if you are feeling lonely, there are online resources, adult adoptee peer social support groups, Facebook groups, Instagram accounts to find your community. Because once we're with our people, we can then and first and only then start to figure out how will we get out of this well together.
Yeah. I think that that contrast that you draw there between being alone and feeling lonely, I think is beautiful, and I think you could made it even clearly. If I would, well, yeah, I would add onto that. There's a difference between being alone and feeling alone.
Mhm. That's right.
And that finding the people, finding the
Finding people, the
sorry?
people that can relate to you, the people that can listen to when you share an experience and they don't look at you crazy or gaslight you or make you feel like there's something wrong, but instead they sit there and they
Yeah,
put their hand on their shoulder and they say, "Yeah, me too.
yeah.
I get it."
That that uh, that little story of seeing yourself in the in the glass and being surprised. Is that the word you used? Surprised?
Surprised, startled, right.
Startled, yeah. That's so poignant because it goes to the it goes to, for me, it goes to the very heart of the identity issue in a way that I've not seen before. And I've done a few podcasts with transracially adopted people. But there's a real clarity in that moment, maybe because it was so personal and it was so, clearly put, so simple and yet so complex. And
Right.
I'm sure that people listening have their own little moments like that as well.
Mhm.
And it's at the heart of, yeah. So being alone and feeling lonely and being different and feeling different, it's like in that moment you're feeling very different, and you think, and you at that point, it would seem that that's a point. You know, I use the word confusion, you said the word complexity, but that startling, and the confusion would seem to go.
Yes. And very interchangeable. You know, I work with so many transracial adopted people that have shared that they had very similar experiences, whether it was looking at themselves in the mirror or not knowing how to fill out a census sheet or not knowing how to answer when somebody says, "Where are you from?" And the city where they live with isn't exactly what the asker is looking for. They want to know what country your origins are. And so regardless of that, so many, I would say unanimously, Simon, transracially adopted people have the same experience in the sense that they know what it feels like, but they can't always talk about it because they don't have the language to express that kind of confusion or complexity because it's so simple yet so intrusive. And I was meeting recently with a little girl who identifies as Latina, and in her community, she has never once seen an adult Latino person. Her doctors are white, her teachers are white, her neighbors are white. There's nothing wrong with being white. I think that's the message a lot of people take from a really defensive perspective, but yet she's not around white people who are trying to help her dispel racism. She's not around other people who look like her. And so she will be growing up 40 years after me, still being shocked looking in the mirror. And the hope that I can give to those parents, the psychoeducation, is that those parents need to do better. In the year that we're in with the technology and all the resources that are out there, adoptive parents don't have an excuse anymore to say, I didn't know that I needed to do XYZ. This little girl needs to see adults that identify as Latino. She needs to have relationships, real relationships with adults that are Latino so that when she grows up, she doesn't surprise herself looking in the mirror. When she grows up, she doesn't wait for her hair to turn blonde like her mom's. Instead, she knows what a grandma who's Latino looks like. And so this is about race and representation, Simon. So have different representative races within your home. And I'm not just talking about one ethnic doll or eating at the local Chinese place. I'm talking about having actual relationships with people so that your child can see that they are not the only Latino person in their life.
Yeah. I talked about this healing as seeing things differently. And we're talking about seeing different things here, aren't we? We're talking about seeing different people in our neighborhood, in our life. And we're talking about something. We're talking about an experience here, aren't we? We're talking about a different experience for
Yes.
kids.
Yes.
We're
Same
not.
race
Yeah.
adoptees. We all have commonalities of the primal wound, but transracial adoptees have another layer, another
Yeah.
lifetime of experiences, particularly in the way that people of color are treated all over the world. So we don't have privilege. We may benefit from our parents' indirect privilege for a short period of time, if that's even a thing. But it's not just a part of our identity, and once we accept it, we become it. It's a lifetime exploration of identifying what we don't have, setting goals and expectations to achieve what we need to have, and then reclaiming it, celebrating it, feeling empowered. Because here's the thing, adoption is generational. My children also need to know what it means to be biracial, because they are. And so that exploration and race and identity continues through our children. Being a conspicuous family in your community versus an inconspicuous family in your community are two very different experiences.
Yeah. What does identity mean to you?
I like to visualize my body. And in fact, this is an activity I do with adopted kids all the time, Simon. I have them lay down on this huge piece of canvas or paper, and I trace and outline their body. And then when they stand up and they look down, I ask them, what do you see? What do other people see? And then we divide the body in different parts. And identity to me is all the collective parts of who I am, including the pieces that I've lost. When that comes together as a collective and it's something that I accept or that I want to achieve, to me, that's identity. And that's a combination of my own perspective, so how I see myself, but it's also including how other people see me, because we learn from that, don't we? We learn eventually what other people expect of us. Not that it's right or wrong, but as people of color, we that's something that just happens and that we need to adjust to. It's part of the assimilation process. So identity essentially is your culture. And I'm not talking about language and clothes and food, meaning the culture that I identify is South Korean born, Midwest raised, transracial adopted person. That's a huge part. It's not all of me, but it's a huge part of my identity because it changed the trajectory of my life. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a therapist. I talk about identity in terms of sexuality and gender identity and age and ability and all the different things. Identity is what you decide it is for you, and that can include pieces that you're missing.
Yeah. So how do you help your clients choose, decide, understand, clarify, rationalize, whatever word works best for you, their identity? How?
My job is not necessarily to help them with that particular piece.
Okay.
My job is to jump in the well and sit at the bottom of the well with them until they're ready. And then once we're ready together, we talk about the different ways or the plan to get to where we need to be. And for many transracial adoptees, that includes identity, but that experience never, and I rarely say never, but never happens in a set amount of appointments. I come into an adopted person's life for a period of time, and I might sit with them and I might um, give them language to name what they're already feeling. I give them compassion and empathy to remind them they're not completely alone or lonely. And as we navigate those feelings, I also hold space for them to grieve. You think about the grieving widow and the space that their family and community and friends give the widow. They bring them meals, they check on their children, they help run errands, they send them flowers. They don't show up the day after they lose their spouse with a new spouse and say, here's your replacement spouse. Be grateful. You have a new spouse. So I hold that same honor for adoptees to recognize what they've lost. And it might include people, birth parents, siblings, but it also includes entire cultures and religions and ethnicities and races. And I think once we can acknowledge everything we've lost, first and only then can we even expect an adopted person to start identifying their expectations of where they want to be or who they want to be.
Yeah. Wow. This is getting clearer. It's getting clearer for me. I'm conscious of time, and it's flown, hasn't it? Is there a question that I've not asked you that you'd like to answer?
There is. It has a lot to do with the name of your podcast, Simon. Thriving Adoptees.
Sure.
I would love for you to ask me if I identify as a thriving adoptee.
Do you identify as a thriving adoptee?
My answer is depends on the day.
Okay.
So
can I ask you a question on that?
Oh, then? Sure.
Yeah. So is that because you don't believe that you're thriving when you're feeling down?
So part of my identity, as I mentioned, is a transracial international adoptee. Another part of my identity, Simon, is that I'm a cancer survivor. So while I was going through treatment, right, physiological treatment, I was in survival mode. Much of my life as an adopted person, although I didn't call it this at the time, I reflect back in hindsight, I was in survival mode. It wasn't until I stopped all active treatment, I graduated from active treatment, and I started to feel better physically and emotionally. I am no longer a cancer survivor, I'm a cancer thriver, right? And there are days where I don't feel well, or my medication's not working, or I have a scare. Am I still thriving? Yes, but if we acknowledge trauma as a part of the medical world, we also acknowledge trauma as a part of the adoptees world. At any point in time, if there's a trigger, if there's a concern, if there's a fear, my thriving status can absolutely bounce back to survival. And that can be very alarming. It can be very scary. That's called trauma. And so as an adopted person, I identify most days as a thriving adoptee, not because I've healed, not because I know who I am, but because I've accepted how I've gotten to where I have. I've done the work to grieve what I've lost. And now I am privileged to have choices of what I will do moving forward. So to me, there's a difference between surviving and thriving.
Yeah. So, as I said earlier on, I'm a simple guy, right? So, if we're okay with not feeling okay, we're always okay.
If we have an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation, that's normal.
Yeah, totally.
And adoption, whether we like to hear it or not, is abnormal. We expect children to attach and bond to people that they are not biologically related to. And if they struggle to do that, we pathologize that. And we say the adoptee has issues.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair. I don't believe that.
Me neither. So this is how I would see it. It's okay to not feel okay. There's we talked to, and this is actually on the back of what you said earlier on, right? So you said being alone and feeling lonely. And I came up with a slightly, what did I say? Feeling alone and being alone. Being alone
Yes.
and feeling alone, right? So I'm not trying to be smart on the words here, but I'm trying to be ultra precise.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between feeling okay and being okay. So we say to people, how are you? And what we mean is, how are you feeling? Or,
right.
or in perhaps in your sense, how are you, as in, how are you physically,
Right.
given the cancer stuff? So how are you physically? So, but normally when we say, how are you to somebody, we're talking about how they are feeling.
Right.
And I'm making a distinction between feeling and being. So
Right.
I know that I'm always okay. In like I lose sight of that. I am even okay when I'm not feeling okay.
Yes.
There's a difference between how we are, essentially, our essential nature is okay. I believe everybody's essential nature is okay. Everybody is okay. We just don't feel okay all the time.
I agree.
And we have become emotophobic.
Yes.
We are very concerned about how we feel. We're very concerned about how we feel, and we are less aware of who. So I'm going to physical stuff here. Not physical. Perhaps I'm going too far down. I don't know. Am I going too philosophical here for you?
No, I'm with you. I'm enjoying this because I agree with you. And as human beings, mostly culturally, there's something very vulnerable about admitting out loud that we're not okay.
So how I see this is the fact that well, I have felt wounded.
Mhm.
I have felt primarily wounded. Okay.
Yes.
But I am fundamentally unwoundable because I am not my feelings.
Okay.
I am not my feelings. Now, I am not my feelings. I have felt wounded, but who I am is unwoundable. Who we all are is unwoundable. So as human beings, so we are the screen. We're looking at a screen. Right? We're recording this on Zoom, listeners. We are the screen. That's who we are. And our feelings are pixels on that screen. They're not who we are, and neither are thoughts. And this is a metaphor from a guy called Rupert Spira. So yeah, we are the whole of the screen. Our feelings are pixels on it, but those pixels are very loud. So if you like, he describes this as a movie. It's saying it's a movie. So a horror movie doesn't make the screen scared. A comedy movie doesn't make the screen laugh. The movie doesn't affect the screen. And so the screen is fundamentally unwoundable, and that's who we are.
It's so intense to try and talk about our identities without considering philosophy and religion and so many things beyond the simple fact that we are or we aren't, right? A- And I think when it comes to adopted people, Simon, they might say, well, I am fundamentally wounded, primally,
Yes.
but I'm still okay, or vice versa. I'm not primarily. And so I think the biggest piece that we both are talking about from different angles, it's about perspective. It's about what's relative. So someone in my neighborhood who comes to my door and says, I'm starving, do you have food? and I feed them. In their experience, they are starving. However, somebody from a different part of the country who hasn't eaten in a week might say, I'm starving. They're both feeling starving, but their ideas of starving is relative to what they've experienced.
Yeah, certainly. And our feelings are very, very real.
Yes, absolutely.
They're very real. And my take on identity is pretty, or my choice of identity, to use your term, my choice of identity is pretty radical and pretty far out. I'd say most people, well, would you say that we are our feelings?
Our perception becomes our reality. So if I am feeling very angry, that does not mean I'm an angry person. It means I'm a person that has the capacity to feel angry.
Yeah. So 1 minute I'm angry, the next minute I'm not. There's an I that is unchanged, whereas the feeling changes. So who we are at our essence, this is purely my take, right? Who we are, identity, like diamonds are forever. You know that? There's a Bond film from the 70s called Diamonds Are Forever. It's sung by, and the theme tune is Diamonds Are Forever. It's sung by Shirley Bassey. And so the diamond is forever, even if it is hidden in a pile of horse manure. And the horse manure are the feelings that we all have, the negative feelings that we all have as part of the human race. So for me, the diamond hidden in the horse manure is fundamentally unchanged by the manure of the feelings.
Yes, I follow that. However, I'm going to challenge you back because
Go
I'm
for
enjoying
it. Go for it.
diamond.
Yeah, love it.
Depending on your perspective will impact the value of the diamond. So the diamond is forever a diamond. However, to me, it might be worth $1,000, and it might be worth me digging through the manure to get it. To somebody else, $1,000 is pocket change, and they would leave it. So I think that's where we're thinking about feelings, and in any dyadic relationship, any two human beings, there's an element of feelings and how much they're worth, which is why there's so many conflicts in relationships, because I might feel a certain way and you may disagree, but you may not change the way I feel based on what you agree with. And that's the root of all conflicts in relationships. Versus, this is how I feel. I'm sitting with you, Simon. I'm acknowledging how you feel. You're acknowledging how I feel. And that's it. It's pretty simple.
When I saw different, oh no, I've started, so I finished. When I saw a price list by ethnicity, I was almost sick.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that we're all priceless.
In the transracial adoption community, which is a business, there are some agencies who do assign a different fee structure for children of color. It's supply and demand.
Yeah. That almost made me sick when I heard that.
It's a reality.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Simon, I've really enjoyed our time together today.
Me
I
too.
feel like I could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, we've been on about just over an hour. So
Yeah, you
we
might
think
have to
we'll
have me
bring.
back.
Sorry?
You might have to invite me back.
I certainly will. You by all means. Let's do this. Let's do this again. And it's been very enlightening for me, and I feel that we need to. We had a bit of a downer there, so I feel that we need to end on a high note. Can you think of a high note to leave our listeners with? Because I just took us down.
I think that's okay. I think to summarize our time together, it's okay not to feel okay for now. It's okay.
Thanks a lot, Jaclyn. You're an
Thanks
absolute
for having
star.
me, Simon. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you, listeners. We will speak to you again soon.